So this is so you can sort of follow along with the changes that we're going to make. All right, so this is my fork. So like I've actually changed some of the playbooks to make them work with AAP. So this link will be important if you want to see like the deltas of what I did, you know, a diff of that versus the way that they were previous. So this GitHub is just, you know, this link is here just for you for comparison purposes. And that was one of the repos tabs over here that we'll go back to. That's my stuff so that we can see it update. So actually, let me make sure I figure out which one is me before I get started. That's not me. This one's me. Okay. So I'm going to cheat a little bit and get rid of the ones that are not me. All right. So this one's my repo, and we'll come back to that. All right. So let me log in real quick. And before we do some, you know, provision changes, what I wanted to show you is a couple things that I did that's a little bit different. So I have my inventory set up, and I call it AVD, right? So you see that it has all these variables, and we can look at it in YAML format. So this was read in from my repo, but I didn't read in like the password and a couple other like more sensitive things here. So what I decided to do was to make those extra variables that I'm defining in my job template. And that's where I manage the playbook run in the AAP. So that is like one difference, right, than what we saw. And I did that because I didn't want to, you know, send all that stuff out into the repo. So that's a difference there. And then my source here, just to show you how that was set up. I also called that AVD. And you can see that I can sync it. And what it's syncing it from is the project. And it's looking for that inventory.yaml file as it is in the original repo. But this would be my forked version of that. So every time this syncs, it pulls that in. So anything that we're updating that's inventory specific is also updated. And that's where I'm making changes to inventory related variables like group vars and host vars. It'll read those in. I have it set up to read those in because we want to see those changes. So that's how this this inventory source is dynamic in the sense that it's always reading in from the project, which reads it in from the repo, if that makes sense. So that's that. And then when we get into the project that we saw, mine will be pretty much the same as how it was in the directions, except for this is my branch. Right, so, or my forked version of this. So it's my main branch, but it's the fork of the original. So I don't have to do anything else here. It's just a public repo, so I can just read it in, or it like clones it down. But here's one important salient point is that I update it every time before I launch a playbook. So that happens in the project, and it also happens in the inventory. We want to update the inventory from the project every time. And when we run the job, you'll see those in action. So that's where those are coming from. The other thing is, let me show you the template. So let me search for it. CVP. I thought I named it something CVP, so it should. Here, let me make this bigger so I can look a little bit better. In the controller. Yeah, I don't know why that. Did I not type CVP? All right, well, this is the one that I'm looking for. So this is a job template. And if I go into the job template, you can see like this is like a lab token that I made in my lab, right? So I didn't put it in my inventory, but it's only here locally, and it only works in my lab environment, right? So I'm just kind of localizing all these things. So that's what I did here is I added those as variables. How you would do that is just you can do that from the GUI, or you could actually run a playbook that does this, like controller as code, it configures your AAP, but we're not going to get into that level of complexity. So just you would go in and hit edit, and then you have access to make changes to your job template. So we did that already, right? So I should be good to go with like my user password, and the other things that they had in their inventory, I just moved them into here. So I should be able to run my template. So if I launch the template, it's going to go through, but we haven't told it to configure anything differently. So what I want to do now, since we kind of had the lay of the land, is we're going to go a little bit further into this, and we'll start doing some of the things that they're talking about. So this one here is just turning on OSPF, and I can do that from a group bar. So here's where the screens are going to kind of get a little bit confusing, because now what I'm going to do is bring up my VS Code, and this is where I can modify my files locally, and then I can push them to the repo. So I'm over here locally, and I have my group bars are right here. So in this ATD fabric, I can find that line. I think it's like higher up. And just, they made it really easy in these examples. You just have to uncomment a lot of these variables. And then now that variable is, we can read that in. So we're going to turn on OSPF. So I need to save that here. But then I also need to push that to the repo. So OSPF, sync it with the repo. And then here's my repo. And I need to go into where we are right now. So into the inventory. And we'll go into the group var. See how it says now, like we just made a commit now, and I called it OSPF. So we go into here in this file, you can see wherever, here's OSPF. That's the change that we made. So now that this should make CVP, configure the OSPF configuration. So for that to work, I'll go back into AAP, and I'll make this bigger for a second so it's easier to look at. And we'll launch it. And it's going to try to connect to that sandbox environment, that Arista test drive. So what it's doing right now, because like the playbook doesn't start immediately, you can see that we did a source control, like we're pulling it down. So it's pulling down that forked inventory, or I'm sorry, that forked repo. And then now it's syncing my inventory. So any changes that were made that were inventory specific, like those group bars, it's doing that. And now it's running the playbook, or it's getting ready to run the playbook. It's also loading like the collection and all that stuff. So now it's running the task in the playbook. But I have some additional tasks here that I added. So it's definitely worth us like double clicking into that. So one of the things that we can do is take a look at it from the CVP. Let me refresh the screen. All right, so once that completes, because we're, well, we are August 29th. This is the latest one, okay. So we can see that we made some configuration changes. Most of it, let me kind of scroll down. It's probably hard to see. But before I do that, this is like the high level. This is like a workflow, right? So we had some validation based off of our configlets, which is like the way, like our single source of truth of our like golden config of how we configure devices in the CVP. We kind of like run it against that to make sure that it's a good config. So our config has been validated. That doesn't mean our environment has been validated, but our config is good. So this one passed. And then it shows us a diff. So in the diff, we can see that all of the configs that are new on the left are something to do with OSPF. And on the right, OSPF did not exist. Right, so we're adding a bunch of OSPF related configurations that were needed for the underlay. And then it actually, I guess it took out some things too. All right, so that's the state of the config. So I'm going to show you like how that worked and the things that it changed in my repo. So if I go back into my repo and we go look in the inventory, we have these intended configs, and see how this one was updated like 2 minutes ago. So there's the configs, which is like, you know, the text file of the config, and structured configs is the YAML version of the configurations. So like if we look here, we can see that 2 minutes ago, we have some updates to those. And if we look in here, most of what is new would also, you know, be related to the OSPF, right? So we have OSPF in here now, right? So that is the normal text version of the configs, and then we'll go back into structured. Right, and this is just the structured data representing the configuration in YAML, you know, for that device. And it's the same thing. If we look through here, we're just going to find that now we have, you know, OSPF related configurations as well. So let me, can I do Control F in here? Yeah, so just finding lines that have OSPF. So that's kind of like the current state, right? So the easiest thing I can do is take OSPF out, you know, and then you'll see that change. So we've updated like all of our configurations in the repo. So so before we go and make a change, like how did we do that? How do we push them back into the repo? I showed you how we read in, right? Because we pull in from the repo in that project. But the way AAP works is that in the playbook itself, that's where we manage the source control to publish changes back into a repo. And this may be new to some of you. The collection that I'm using is, you know, specifically for source control management. So it's the Ansible.scm, and it can read in like the equivalent of clone, and then also you can create new branches, and then you can publish to a new or an existing branch using that module. So to see that one, and since we're in my repo, it's actually that playbook would be in here. So if I go back into, I guess here, go up to the parent directory and look in the playbooks, this is the playbook that we're using. And what you'll see is when we go into the task, I have a task here that's pointing to my forked repo, and I'm creating a temporary directory in my execution environment. So what the heck is an execution environment? So the execution environment is a container that's running all of that content that we need. So all of the collections and things like that are running in a container that we call an execution environment that AAP has access to, and it's ephemeral. So we have an Ansible runner that's only active when we spin that container up, and then that's only active as we run the playbook. So for that, you know, ethereal amount of time that we have access to that, what we're doing is we're just saving, we're cloning down that repo, and then we have access to all those files locally. So if we make a change to any of those files, we can publish them back into the repo before we close out this playbook. So that's what we're doing here. This is like the equivalent of cloning down. And what we're cloning down is the master branch. So it could have been, you know, any other available branch as well. We clone it down, and then we can go through the regular steps that were already in a part of the roles, right? So I'm including roles. And the reason why I'm including them instead of installing the roles is because I want to do some pre-types of tasks and some post-tasks. And the reason I'm doing that too is we have these files now that we have access to, and the directories are a bit different. So I'm copying over like my my structured configs and my configs and documentation. I'm copying them from the runner that's temporary into this repo that I've created that's also temporary, but then I can publish from the repo back out, and that's what we're doing here. So this repository path was defined up here. So when we registered this repository, register parameter is just used so that we glean something in our Ansible playbook, and then we load it into memory. So here we pick that up from memory, and then we're looking for the path, which will include like that, you know, that folder path that we used. And from that, we're going to publish that into the repo. So that does require additional credentials. And obviously, these credentials are not in my inventory either. So you can either create the credentials in your AAP as a credential, or you could add those as extra variables. But the safer way to do it, or secure way, would be credentials. Or you could do like Ansible Vault of those as well and create like a separate file. But the point is, these just remain variables. And then this is what I would need to effectively log AAP into my GitHub repository for my fork branch, and then I can make changes to it. So after we updated all the files, then we would run the provisioning, right? So that's where we needed that lab token that I have as an extra variable. And then this is like the address for the test drive sandbox that I'm using. So you might recall that I showed you, like in the instructions, it said that we had to populate this, and that I've changed this to my specific address as opposed to the default one that it would pull in from the inventory, which was the 192.168.0.5. That could work if your lab, if you change it to that, but like normally you're most likely you're gonna have to change that to whatever your target is for the CVP. So now that I made these changes here, then everything that we're doing is being copied over and published back into the repo whenever we change a file. So right now we have OSPF. If I jump back into here, into my local VS Code, right, and then simply just comment that again and save it. And I might only have time to do like one more of these, actually, because I'm going a little bit longer, but I will split the video in half for folks that read it later. So this one is just no OSPF. Commit, sync it. And then we'll go into here and make sure that we've got it. Yeah, so now it's commented out. So we'll run it again from here. I can just do this, run it again that way. And it's going to do the same things. It's going to go, because every time I have it set up, it's going to go, pull in the source control from the repo. So it should pick up that change, and then also check the inventory to make sure that nothing in the inventory has changed. And if you have scenarios where your inventory is not going to change every time, then obviously you would want to turn that off. It would go a little bit quicker, because then you would just have to wait for the source control part of it. If we had more time, I would delete the inventory here, and we would see that it would rebuild it again and pull it back down. So now it's running the playbook. So we can pop back into here, go to workspaces, and it hasn't shown up yet. It hasn't gotten deep enough into the playbook yet. All right, here we go. See pending. And that means that this is still probably doing something. Once it finishes deploying the changes, then this should also finish here. Do. Let me just make, oh, okay. Sometimes I have to refresh it. All right, so it made changes. That's done, so that's this now. All right, and now we can see that we've removed the OSPF configs on the left. So that's the diff, and it was good to go from like a configlet standpoint. That's where you configure those in here. So this is kind of like our intended or our golden configuration that it looks against. So that's kind of all those constructs. The only other thing that I had, I was going to show you like changing other, additional things, but due to time, the one other like valid or salient point is the the ability to do the validations. And again, I couldn't do that in AAP because I don't have access to those devices. But what you can do in these test drives is, in which screen is it? Over here, you can go into this programmability IDE, is like a web version of the VS Code. And hopefully it's still in there the way that I had it. Blah, blah, blah. Let me do change directories. Is it not there anymore? Yeah, so what I have to do, hopefully this doesn't only takes a minute. So I need to go back to here and go up to the top. I'm going to copy this. Where are you? This one. Get phone. Right, and then I'll be able to open that folder. I do it from, oh, here are these. File, open folder. And I want to go project. This is me, okay. So basically I'm cloning down my repo into here. So that's where we're at right now. And I can see like all of the different folders and everything that we've done thus far shows up here. So what I want to do is I want to run a particular playbook in here, which is this one right here. Where's it at? Yeah, the ATD validated states YAML playbook. So that's a screenshot. So I'm gonna have to type that. So go over here. Again, I have to do the Ansible playbook because my controller can't access it directly to those IPs. Playbooks, and it's ATD validate. And you'll see it's creating files as it goes through the playbooks. So where was that in here, right? Or reports, test results. No. Where does it go? Reports folder, ATD inventory reports. Let me make this bigger too so I can see it. Oh, here's the reports down here. And yeah, here's the results. This one's hard. I got to kind of move stuff around so you can see it. So it's going to go through and it's doing all of these different checks for like the peers. So BGP is configured now. We don't have OSPF in here anymore. And it's just doing validations. But what I could do is if I had AAP, I would just push this back into my repo. But I can't do that because I can't connect to the devices. But what I can do from here, which is also going to be problematic because it's going to ask me for my credentials and all that stuff, is I can have it go back this way. There are no stage changes. Would you like to stage? Yeah. Sync. I think I'm going to get stuck with, yeah. So I can't really do it that way. So I can do it like this. I don't know if my password's going to work. I might need a token. Yeah. If I hit sync, it'll go through all that stuff again. Don't do that. Cancel. TDVL. All right, so I'm gonna have to stop sharing for a second. So I put my credentials in and it updated that. So then what I would see is if I go back into my repo at this point, then I'll be able to go, or let me refresh this. Where was that? Reports, right? Yeah, reports, results. Yeah, so I have test results, JSON, reports. Why does it say yesterday though? It should be what I just did. All right, so back to here. Oh, you know what it is? It didn't change these files because that's the report that I made yesterday is where I took the OSPF out. I think that's why it doesn't change. Like I need this file to actually change so that it would be a change. But the idea is here is like whatever your output is of this, that you can push that back into your repo, but you have to do it manually when it's local like this. So if I'd like just change something in here just to change it. We'll see it change. File. Save. All this stuff again. Why does it say no stage changes to commit? Is this not always like automatically doing it? Okay, now it's maybe I didn't stage it properly or something. Well, it should change now anyway. The extension, no, not that way. This way again. And this time I have my stuff teed up. All right, so that changed there. And then I should be able to refresh that. Yeah, so now we've got these were just, that was what refreshed because I changed that one. Yeah, so they're synced back up. I just didn't have it properly syncing. But the idea is then whatever these test results are, then they would get updated, you know, from the reports back into your repo, if that makes sense.